Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another Teacher Joseph podcast. Well, today we're going to talk about the tooth fairy. Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, let me explain. So, first of all, I'm sure you know what a tooth is. That's the thing that's in your mouth. There's usually many of them, and they're referred to as teeth. It's the things which help you chew up your food. Now, when you're very young, especially when you're a baby or in your early years, of course, you lose those teeth and new adult teeth come in because you're getting older. And when you lose a tooth, it's very common for your parents to take the tooth and leave some cash there. And they tell you that it was left by the tooth fairy. Now, it's a little bit like believing in Santa Claus, okay? When you're young, you happily have an expectation of cash being under your pillow. But of course, many parents forget about it, and many parents don't like to lie to their children. So this idea of a supernatural creature bringing you money is one which perhaps these days is not as common as it was. When I was growing up, the tooth fairy was there, and if I lost a tooth, I would expect her to be there, and I would be very upset if she wasn't. I remember one day, my father was working night shift. He used to go out in the evening to work and come back the next morning. And I woke up in the morning and there was no money. My tooth was still there. And I was devastated, of course. And I started to cry because I was young. It's what young people do if they don't get what they want. And at that point, my father came home from work. And he told me, oh, I just met the tooth fairy on my way home. And she asked me if I would mind giving you the money because she's had a busy night. Of course, I believed him and I happily took the money. But this belief in the tooth fairy is a long-standing belief in the UK. And in all of our colonies and Western-influenced countries, this belief doesn't just belong to the UK. I think in the Mediterranean, they often use animals like a mythical rat or mouse who brings money for the teeth. Well, very interesting. Very interesting. I don't remember a time when the tooth fairy wasn't there. It seems to have been one of those legends which was passed down through the generations. Now, just to clarify what a fairy is, it's a small mythological creature, and if you've ever seen the movie Peter Pan, I'm sure you've seen the fairy, a very small, kind of insignificant, effeminate female girl with wings who dances. Now, fairies weren't always like that. I know that in Scotland and in more rural and indigenous parts of the UK, fairies were known for being very, very dangerous. And I'll explain more about that in a minute. But first of all, let's get back to this idea of the tooth fairy. She's in the news these days because it seems that she's not giving as much money as perhaps she once did. And of course, like all things, the tooth fairy is affected by the recession. Now, just to clarify, of course, she doesn't actually exist. So we're talking about the amount of money the parents give the children when they lose teeth. So that's how common the tooth fairy is. She still has a kind of like a big following. So it says here, even the tooth fairy is feeling the pinch with her payments, which are down 10% in the last 5 years. Now, when we say feeling the pinch, that means feeling rather poor or feeling the costs rising. We say feeling the pinch. Okay, so apparently, even the tooth fairy is feeling the pinch with her payments, which are down 10% in the last 5 years. But some children still pick up £20 for a lost tooth. Oh, really? I'd love to know who those kids are, because I got around, I think, 10 pence, if I was lucky, back in the 1970s. The average payment from a tooth fairy is now £1.90 per tooth, thanks to the cost of living, which is down from £2.10 5 years ago. And tooth fairy payments vary according to where you live in the UK. So if you're growing up in London, it has the highest payments. So the tooth fairy will leave kids £2.30 a tooth, rising to a £5 average if you live in Kensington, West London, particularly if you live near Buckingham Palace. Well, none of us live near there, do we? So tooth fairy payments are lowest in Newcastle and the northeast, where she only brings 90p, less than £1. And again, in more affluent areas in the north, kids are receiving £5, £10 and £20 instead of the traditional coins. 1 in 10 kids get £10 per tooth, which means that in total, when they lose all of their baby teeth, they get around £200. And these figures come from a website which is called Dental Phobia. It's a website set up to help those of us who are terrified of the dentist. Did you know that English people, I mean people in the UK, have the worst dental record in Europe? We don't like dentists, and that's why they're trying desperately to get us to go. So they set up some research to try and work out how much kids were given from the tooth fairy, and 27% of kids get £1. They actually get the £1 coin for each lost tooth. 25% get a £2 coin. I haven't even seen one of those in years. I always pay by card. And 14% get less than £1, most typically 50p. And then the figures just go on. You could interpret them different ways, but it looks like the amount that kids get from the tooth fairy is definitely falling. Yeah, and everyone's a bit concerned about this because they're saying that, well, maybe kids are being conned out of what they deserve. But for goodness sake, it's only it's only a mythological creature. But of course, kids at school will be comparing how much they get. So yeah, very interesting. They're saying here the tooth fairy makes caring for your teeth a positive part of childhood development. Not with me, it didn't. I didn't even think about my teeth when I got the money. I just wanted to buy sweets with it, and I did. Interesting why they would think that the tooth fairy has anything to do with going to the dentist. Certainly for me, it didn't. It says here, Dr. Eskander, a consultant with Dental Phobia, said most children have a full set of 20 milk or baby teeth by the age of 3, and they start losing them by the age of 6. It takes 6 or more years to grow a full set of 28 adult teeth, Why are they telling us this? I mean, don't they know that we only want the cash? Who cares about dentists and these things? Anyway, that's some information about the Tooth Fairy. The Tooth Fairy has been used to make dramas and comedies across the English world for generations. My favorite version of comedy about the Tooth Fairy was from the TV series Bewitched, which is all about a man and a woman, and the woman's a witch, and they live pretending to be a normal family in suburbia in America. And one of the woman's friends, the woman's name is Samantha, but one of her friends is Mary, the Good Fairy, and she drops in one night to say hi because she was, I think, giving money to kids who'd lost teeth that night. She's a tooth fairy, basically. And Mary, the Good Fairy, comes in, but unfortunately starts drinking. And she gets very, very drunk. And when she's very drunk, she refuses to deliver any more gifts for kids. So she refuses to carry out her duties as the Tooth Fairy, and she gets very drunk and ends up lying on the sofa. And Samantha, the regular lady in the TV show, has to take her place. It's very funny. If you're interested in watching that, it's from the TV series Bewitched, season 7 and episode 15, and it's called Mary, the Good Fairy. It's very amusing. It's like a way of making fun and laughing at some of the things we have in our culture. So yes, Mary the Good Fairy on Bewitched. I promised I would tell you a little bit more about fairies because, as you know, they are portrayed as being very small, innocent, effeminate creatures. They look like insects, but less annoying, especially if they're bringing you cash. But they weren't always like that. That image of the very small girl with wings is something created by Victorians. Fairies generally, especially in the northern parts of the UK, are portrayed as quite fearsome creatures. I know that my grandparents had quite a big belief in that kind of thing. Fairies were large strangers whom they kind of towered above you. They were huge, and you didn't want to meet them because they could really, really harm you if they felt like it. Apparently, in the countryside, if somebody came and said, "Can I do your work for you?" and if they looked quite tall and big, with any kind of deformity, you were to assume that they were fairies. And of course, it was just cultural ways of dealing with strangers. You would think of them as supernatural creatures, and you had to honor them. Otherwise, they could, well, quite frankly, attack you. So the idea was that if you were chopping wood or if you were running a factory, someone came looking for work, you had to give them work and the payment they asked. And they would be considered to be fairies, especially if their skin was a different color or if they clearly didn't look local. You didn't know where other people came from. There was no TV, so it's not like you could say, "Oh, that person looks French," or "that person looks like they could be, Italian or Chinese." It's just if someone came to your neighborhood, you would assume that they were a supernatural creature. And sometimes they would do the work, everything would be fine. Other times they wouldn't, and they could attack you. It was just a cultural way of dealing with criminality, you would blame it on the fairy. So yeah, these were big beliefs in the old days. So of course we're past those days now, but in the 19th century, fairies were portrayed in art as being very small and delicate, and that's a very different thing from really fiery demons like banshees, which people around here used to believe in. The banshee was the one who brought news of death, and she would scream at your window, when in reality it was probably just the wind or your subconscious mind telling you probably what you didn't want to hear. My grandmother was like that. Whenever she heard a noise outside, or a bird dying, she would simply pour herself another glass of whiskey and say, that'll be Mrs. Smith. She'll be gone by the morning. And the scary thing is, she was usually right. So anyway, that's it from me, all about the tooth fairy today. By the way, just so that you know, the tooth fairy actually appears on some coins. I know that in Canada, they started selling special sets of coins containing pictures of the tooth fairy. That was about 10 years ago. And more recently in Australia, they were doing the same thing. Yeah. So the reward is affected by inflation. And yeah, one final thing to say about them, the belief in the tooth fairy is viewed in two different ways, apparently. It's about children trusting nature, and it's also about parents providing comfort for kids. I'm not really sure if giving the kids money because you've lost a tooth is teaching them anything except capitalism. But wow, yeah, very interesting, very interesting. And that's it from me. So I hope you've enjoyed this. This has been all about the tooth fairy, and I'm sure in your culture you have many different ways of describing the same thing. And that's it. See you. Bye.